Hi, welcome to a new episode in the Internet Surfer, hosting the most horror and creepiest stories from Reddit. Please don't forget to comment, like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy.
Infected Town. A series of horror stories from Reddit. Nosleep. Part 1. I'm a self-proclaimed explorer. I love the rush of entering places people rarely go, seeing things people rarely see. Given that I live in a large city, most of what I do is urban exploration, which generally consists of breaking into abandoned buildings and snapping picture after picture. The drive from my coastal city, bet you can guess which one, takes 12 hours on the southbound freeway. But I adore driving, especially alone, so I plan to use mainly back roads, the scenic route, if you will, winding through small towns and wilderness. If I saw anything interesting, be it an old cabin in the woods or a charming small-town diner, I'd stop and check it out. This extended my trip by a significant amount. I wound up driving 6 or 7 hours that first day. Near sunset I started looking for a motel, but all I saw were trees and an empty road. I refused to check my phone for a place to stay, liking the spontaneity and false sense of 21st century danger. I was content in knowing I was going south and would reach civilization eventually. The sun was disappearing behind the trees and a light rain began to fall, typical for this time of year. I took my eyes off the road for a second, fumbled with the cigarette lighter, and realized it was getting a little too dark to see. I flicked on the headlights, glanced out the windshield, and immediately slammed on the brakes. My car skidded a few feet in the rain but luckily stopped before it hit the Jersey barriers that had been set up across the road. They sprang up out of nowhere. No warning signs, no road closed ahead. Just 4 low concrete walls all the way across the 2 lanes. They would have seriously damaged my car if I hadn't seen them in time. I'd been going 45. I caught my breath, wondering how many people had almost crashed as I did. Probably not many. I hadn't seen a single other car for the past 2 hours. A sad, dented detour sign pointed towards a road branching off to the right, through the trees, doubtlessly leading back towards the freeway. But my eyes were drawn to the road beyond the barriers. There was no sign of construction of any kind. The road was empty, and the pavement looked exactly as old as the one I'd just been traveling on. My decision was not a difficult one. Carefully, ignoring the detour, I maneuvered my car along the narrow strip of gravel to the right of the barriers and, quite easily, drove past them. I drove for about 30 minutes, with no sign of construction or life of any kind. It was growing steadily darker, and I was getting unsettled, but that only increased my curiosity. What was at the end of this closed road? When I crested a hill, I was greeted with the sight of a few buildings and a large wooden sign. Welcome to it said. I'm not omitting the name or doing anything cheeky. As to what the town's called, I'm as curious as you are. I couldn't read the name, or any of the other words. Most of the sign from the center down was covered in what looked like splotchy black paint, or maybe some kind of plant life. It was difficult to tell in the falling darkness, but you could see that the boards at the bottom were chipped and scratched, like an animal had gotten to it. Not anything from a monster movie, just the common weathering of old wood left in the forest. But there were manufactured scratches in it, too, gouged deeply into the wood over the black paint. I leaned out the window and pointed my flashlight at it. Come in. Weird. But I've seen much worse graffiti in ghost towns, which I assumed was. That got my heart pumping with excitement. I drove into town, past quite a few promising locations, all dark and empty. A police station, its windows shattered and subsequently boarded, the glass still glittering on the sidewalk. Houses with doors, broken hinges and crooked shutters. A grocery store, where one street lamp still burned eerily green by the entrance. An apartment building, the glass of its double doors and all the windows apparently painted that with the same splotchy black as the town sign. Though my fingers were twitching, I didn't get out of the car. It was getting dark, and I was getting tired. I was alone and had no information on this ghost town. I wasn't about to break into places if they were occupied, especially at night with nothing but a flashlight. Because that's the thing. The town didn't have the air of 50 years of abandonment. Besides the boards across doors and windows and the lack of electric light, this place looked like it could have been inhabited yesterday. There was no building decomposition or crumbling masonry, at least from what I could see. No graffiti anywhere that would have marked the presence of other people, besides the black paint. The architecture was modern and generally held up pretty well. Was this really a ghost town? It must be. I didn't see a single other person. All cars were parked and dusty, all businesses looked closed. This is probably my imagination, but from the moment I drove past the sign, I felt eyes on me from all directions. I didn't feel welcome here, though I was sure there was no one to be bothered. And then there was the smell. It was faint but ever present, floating in the wind as my car crept down Main Street, that stale, earthy scent of old basements and wet, dark places. Mold. The town smelled like mold. I sped up, deciding to drive through the town and continue south. I'd find a place to stay nearby and return in the morning to do a bit of proper exploring. The apartment building and the police station were especially tempting. I'd never explored a police station before. I was just about to cross the bridge that marked the south border of town, leaving the buildings behind and continuing into the woods, when I saw someone walking down near the creek. My heart nearly jumped out of my chest. I'd thought I was alone. I stopped the car but didn't get a particularly good look at the gathering twilight before she, if it was she, disappeared under the bridge. She was very, very thin, starvation status, I'm sure of it, and walked with a pronounced limp. She had a pale head, mostly bald, but near the top of her scalp were growing a few scattered clumps of thin, wispy brown hair. It was really long, it went over her shoulders and down her back. A filthy dress hung off her frame. I watched her for a moment with my mouth open, then sped across the bridge when she disappeared from sight. She hadn't looked up at me, even though my headlights had been shining at her. Part of me thought I should see if I could help her, but most of me was screaming that that was a bad idea. I'm a lone, unarmed woman, and I didn't know who or what was under that bridge. Trust your gut, they say. I reached another set of barriers further down the road, with another detour sign leading oncoming traffic towards the freeway. It seemed these barriers had been set up specifically to cordon off the town. Why? I found a motel near the freeway and a small gas station. I decided to stay the night and go back first thing tomorrow. I called my friend in San Francisco and excitedly explained my discovery and why I might be another day late. Now that I was out of the town, I brushed off the feeling of unease. It had been quiet and eerie, and that lady was creepy as hell, but with the freeway only 10 miles away I figured a transient had wandered along. Maybe she was squatting in the town, but dealing with homeless people is part of the adventure. I asked the gas station attendant about the ghost town up the road. He said he used to get a lot of regulars from up that way, but not for a while. Then the road closed. There used to be a few more signs and some police tape, he said, and he'd seen a couple of police cars parked by the barriers. I asked him the name of the village, but he said he didn't know. I thought that was really weird. Why wouldn't you know the name of a town half an hour away? There's nothing up that way, he said as I left. Oh good. My own personal harbinger of doom. The next morning, I got up and packed my backpack. Flashlights, extra batteries, gloves, an N95 respirator in case of mold or asbestos, some rope, a ton of glow sticks, a few flares, a basic first aid kit and my Swiss Army knife. Plus, bottled water. I also brought my handy-dandy crowbar. It was heavy but worth lugging around in the face of a stuck door or window. Like an idiot, I'd left my camera at home. I'd mourned this since the night before, when I looked in my bag and found it missing. I was sure I'd packed it, having planned to explore a couple places my friend knew of in San Francisco, but it's probably sitting on my bed at home, all lonely and sad. I took a couple pictures in the town with my phone, but none of them turned out. Terrible lighting, I guessed at the time. So. The first exploration. That feeling of being watched returned immediately upon crossing the bridge into the village, and as I drove towards the buildings the scent of mold did, as well. Faint but eternally present. My first stop was the police station. I weighed the pros and cons of breaking into a government building, but not for long. I was too eager. The town was as empty as ever, after all. I parked in the lot behind the station, beside a few dusty squad cars. I guess the building should be called more of a sheriff's office than an actual police station. It's a low, tan-colored building with a ground floor and a basement. The windows in the back aren't busted like the front, but they're grimy. Spots of black adorn the corners of most of them, which I soon discovered was some kind of mold. I've never seen mold like it, though. I tried the front doors first, in case people were actually in the building, but they were locked. I swung around back where I'd seen a metal maintenance door when I parked. It had been firmly shut, I remembered, and I didn't have much hope for it. Already planning to try to pry open a window, I came around the corner of the building. The maintenance door was open. I blinked. Yes, there it was, open just a crack. I couldn't believe I hadn't noticed it before but brushed it off. Breathing deeply, I pulled open the door and was met with the stifling smell of mold. I got the N95 out of my bag and affixed it to my face in case of spores. I stepped inside the building after wedging the door open with a heavy rock. The hallway I stood in had a bathroom to my immediate right and a custodial supply closet to my left. It led into a large office area, with many doors and cubicles. There were 3 small jail cells in the northeast corner, and through a metal door to the east was the reception and waiting area. The place was dusty, and sounds were muffled, like cloth pressed over the ears. The interior had a distinct look of decay, paint was peeling from the walls, all the light bulbs were broken, the carpet was pulling up at the corners. The mold around the windows doesn't have the usual spotty pattern I associate with mold. It grows in groups, usually in corners, in a big black mass, then spreads out in long, slender lines made up of tiny colonies. I'm not even sure it is mold. At times it looks like it. At other times it looks like some kind of plant life. It smells like mold, though. I avoided all physical contact. The walls and ceilings of the building weren't moldy, just the windows. I picked my way through the office area towards the holding cells. It looked eerily as though people had woken up and left in the middle of a workday. Photos and personal effects still sat on desks. Papers and files littered the ground but were also stacked high on desks in and out trays. Rotting jackets were draped over rotting chairs. Most of the doors were locked. The cells were locked, too, and empty. I was a bit disappointed by the building so far. I found out why the front window was shattered when I went into the lobby. Bullet holes peppered the plaster on either side of it, and bullet casings littered the floor. A smear of what looked like dried brown blood painted the wall under the window. What had happened here? There were no bodies. Maybe it was an old crime scene, which was actually pretty cool. I tried taking pictures, but like I said, they didn't turn out. They just looked black, or really blurry sepia tones. Something moved to my left. I couldn't see it, but I heard the shifting of papers and something sliding across the carpet. I froze, pointed my light in its direction, and yelled, "Anyone in here?" No response. My heart rate quickening, I asked again and was again met with only rustling. The noises came from behind the tall reception desk. I got up on my tiptoes and shone my light behind it. The noises stopped. I saw nothing, just a swivel chair and a knocked-over phone. I couldn't see under the desk, and the door to the right that led into the reception area was locked. At this point I assumed an animal was in there, maybe a raccoon. Raccoons freak me out. They're vicious little ones, don't let their adorable faces fool you. In any case, I decided to leave well enough alone and check out the basement. I've mentioned several times that this town made me feel watched. Upon stepping down those creaky wooden stairs and letting the door swing shut behind me, the feeling intensified tenfold. I figured at the time that it was because it was pitch black, and I only had my flashlight to see by. The decay down there was particularly bad. The entire ceiling was covered in black, as well as the ventilation ducts. The mold oozed halfway down the wall, which dripped brackish water. Along one wall hung 3 headless human figures, brown and rotting. They made me jump violently when my light landed on them, but a second look told me that they were actually old hazmat suits that seemed to be covered in filth. The helmets lay at their feet. Someone had set up a makeshift lab down here, between filing cabinets and cardboard boxes. The rotting counters on the opposite wall held a microscope, a bunch of dirty test tubes and glassware, and a 2013 Mac desktop, which looked just as moldy as the rest of the place. That gave me pause. I'd never seen this level of decay in such a modern building. The computer looked like it had been there for 30 years, not one. A pile of papers sat next to the microscope, mildewed and barely legible but dense with type. I remember a few phrases from when I glanced at it, like signs of accelerated growth and stage 1 symptoms, that caught my attention. I was about to start flipping through the file, but before I could even touch it, the door at the top of the stairs behind me slammed open. I yelped and spun around. "Get up here," someone screamed from upstairs. It was a male voice, ragged and breaking. Though the tone was aggressive, he didn't sound angry so much as panicked. It made my heart thud. The beam of my flashlight didn't reach the top of the stairs, so I couldn't see who was calling me. No one was at the top of the stairs when I got closer. Eager by now to get out of the building, I took them 2 at a time. The main floor hallway was empty, too, which both relieved and perplexed me. Where had the man gone? Didn't matter. I decided to try to escape any form of trouble and made my way quickly towards the maintenance door I'd entered the building by. It had shut behind me, I noticed immediately, which meant someone else was definitely in the building. I raced towards it, though nothing was chasing me, almost expecting it to be locked. But it opened quite easily, and I spilled out into the sunlight. I tripped over the heavy rock I'd used to prop the door open, which had been purposely moved, picked myself up and found sanctuary in my car. I probably should have left town then. The experience with the screaming man had set me on edge, and I hadn't really enjoyed exploring the police station. Even seeing the old crime scene in the lobby had failed to really pique my enthusiasm, prodding instead at my underlying fears. But what happened there? Was the bloodstain connected to the lab in the basement? I wasn't done looking around town. After leaving the police station, I still had the entire day left and really wanted to explore this town was worthwhile. I decided to check out the apartment building. Hillside Apartments is a 4-story building on the south end of town, not far from the bridge. It's a very normal-looking brick building from the outside, probably built sometime in the 80s, with no signs of structural decay. The only strange thing, as you're walking up to the front doors, is that all the windows on the face of the building are covered in black from the inside. As with the town sign, I thought at first that it was black spray paint or something of the like. As you might have guessed, though, it's mold. The front doors were locked. There was a keypad and call box, but neither seemed to have power running to them. I made my way around the parking lot of the building, past a row of dusty cars, and up a wheelchair ramp towards the back door. It was stuck or something. The handle turned and there was no sign of a deadlock, but no amount of pushing on my part would make it open. I half-heartedly gave the crowbar a few tries, but soon gave up. The ground floor windows around the front were low enough to slide through easily. Luckily for me, the third window I attempted was unlocked and slid open, only sticking once or twice. I plopped my backpack through, then followed headfirst. I had to push my way through the rotting Venetian blinds. I found myself in an apartment bedroom. After turning on my flashlight, I let the beam wander around for only a moment before reaching back into my back for the respirator again. This place looked worse than the police station basement. Black mold covered the floors, walls, and ceilings. Water gathered in one corner of the ceiling as under a busted pipe, letting gray droplets escape to join the pool of water on the decaying mattress underneath. Furniture had been reduced to vague shapes, stained and rotten, in tons of gray and black. I left the bedroom and walked into a living area that could have been inhabited yesterday, if not for the mold. Again, the place didn't just look deserted, it looked like it had been evacuated. A few bottles and cans littered the coffee table in the living room, near an entertainment cabinet with an expensive-looking, yet seemingly decaying, sound system and TV. A couple plates sat on the counter in the kitchen, covered in black gunk, along with a sink full of dishes growing green algae. But the creepiest things were the family photos lining the walls, mom, dad, 2 infants, grinning at me from silver frames. All left there hanging, mold beginning to creep over their happy, normal faces. Anyone moving out would take those, surely. I could explain away the dishes and even the electronics, but family pictures. People run back into fires for family pictures. I left the apartment, unnerved, and turned back to see which number it was. Only there were no numbers on the door. I shone my light down the hall to either side. No numbers on any doors. Why? The more I discovered in this town, the weirder it seemed to get. I decided to do a thorough sweep of the apartment building and see if I could enter every room. It would take a while, but I wanted answers. Maybe I'd even go back to the police station once I'd given the man time to leave. I find, when exploring, that a systematic approach works best for me. I usually choose a corner in the highest or lowest accessible area of the building and spread out from there. This ensures that, if the building proves interesting and you want to make sure you've seen all of it, that you don't end up confusing yourself and skipping or backtracking. This building wasn't all that big, so I wasn't worried about getting lost. What concerned me was the idea of someone else being in the building with me. I couldn't shake the feeling. Hillside Apartments is much darker inside than it has any right to be. Darkness breeds everywhere, so deep that the corners look like a void. At one point I turned off my flashlight, on the ground floor mind you, and discovered I couldn't see my hand if I moved it more than 5 inches from my face. It was an unnatural darkness for 11 a.m. on a Saturday, even inside. Glass crunched under my boots as I made my way down the hall, and I looked up to see that every fixture was missing a bulb and had been grown over with mold. The windows all hosted their own colonies, too, eliminating all light from the sun. My goal was the stairs, but I tried every apartment on the way there. More than a few were locked, but the doors I could open showed me much the same scene as that first apartment. Stained, moldy couches, cushions flattened with use. Full trash bins and half-loaded dishwashers. Broken desktop computers and TVs, personal effects left behind and slowly being taken over by mold, pictures, books, clothes, magazines, jewelry boxes. While personal effects remained, every identifying detail or number seemed elusive. Rot covered the date in a newspaper I found. Mail left in piles on a bookshelf had been so waterlogged that the names and addresses were illegible. It became a kind of game for me to try to find one piece of evidence as to when the town had last been functioning and who had lived here. Even a year would have made me jump for joy. I still want to confirm this. If I find that the town had been inhabited in 2012 or 2013, there's more evidence that it's the place where Alan and Liz lived. At one point I came into the lobby, which was large enough that the beam of my flashlight didn't reach the opposite wall, swallowed instead into darkness. I didn't linger here for long. I hated feeling like I was in such a vast place, like the mouth of a pitch-black cave. Quickly, I found a door marked stairway, and went inside. Whereas the lobby brought out my agoraphobia, this space seemed uncomfortably cramped. I felt I was being encroached on from all sides by the grimy walls as I made my way down the concrete steps, so much so that I kept swinging my light left and right to make sure the passage wasn't getting narrower. Raspy breathing filled the space, and I'm not sure it was my just own. Immediately upon leaving the stairway, my light found shelves filled with rusty machinery and a ceiling of blackened pipes. Custodial and maintenance tools littered the floor. The hallway ahead gave me the creeps. Like the lobby, my light was swallowed by blackness before it ended, so I turned right and went down a shorter corridor to an open door. At first glance, things looked typical for the building. Decay reigned, but everything was recognizable. A hulking mass of rusted machinery took up half the room, and pipes and ventilation shafts crisscrossed the moldy ceiling. In one corner of the wall was a set of iron ladder rungs leading up to a trapdoor in the ceiling. When I shone my flashlight towards the boilers and their pipes, something struck me as odd. It looked like something was behind the machinery. I came closer, peering between pipes and around twisted hunks of metal, but couldn't get a good look. There was definitely something back there. Finally, I squeezed myself between a boiler and a wall, changed my flashlight to the other hand, and got a good look at my discovery. It was laying on a pile of mold, as though the fungus had gathered around in a mound as a makeshift bed. Can mold pile up so high? I'm not sure what it was, but I have an idea after reading Jessica's story. It was tiny, smaller than most humans. It lay in the fetal position, all curled in on itself, except for its shriveled white legs, which hung at an unnatural angle from its hips. There were no toes or anything recognizable as feet, from what I could see, and no hands besides two fused masses of flesh at the end of its arms. I could see its ribs through its flesh on the torso, but all other details you associate with a human being were gone. No belly button, no nipples, no hair. It was too pale to be flesh-toned, with a hint of gray like a decaying corpse. The head was bald and withered. Its face turned towards me. At least, I thought it was. There were no eyes, no nose, just a smooth expanse of pallid flesh over the largest mouth I'd ever seen. The creature was smiling, broadly, from ear to ear and chin to cheekbones. Its teeth were human-shaped but far longer and seemed fused together. There was no gap between the teeth of the upper jaw and teeth of the lower. I freaked out. While trying to squirm out of the space between boiler and wall, I noticed something about the creature. No movement, no breathing. Not even a twitch or any kind of reaction to my presence. I realized, after a minute, that it was dead. That was enough for me. I couldn't stand to be in the building another minute. I raced up the stairs and, avoiding the lobby, went back to the window I entered through. I fell through so quickly that I knocked the wind out of myself when I landed. As I had upon leaving the police station, I found sanctuary in my car. Except this time, I drove straight out of town. I rationalized these events back at the motel, between a hot shower and a cold beer. Maybe it had been a doll of some kind, or a mannequin, or even a petrified animal. I think at one point I decided it was an irregular student art project. But now I think I saw the same creature Jess had seen in the basement of the building 7 months ago, only this time it wasn't moving around. So, the next day I continued into San Francisco, glad to be putting distance between myself and the ghost town.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.